Hi guys, welcome back to my studio and for video 3 of my online tailoring course. Firstly, I'd like to thank everybody for all the feedback and positive comments that I've had for the last videos. It's really appreciated, and hopefully the rest of the series will be just as useful. So video 3, we're going to start some actual tailoring, and we're going to begin by drafting part of our patterns. Now, I know some of you won't want to draft your patterns yet, and that's fine. Go and get a commercial pattern ready that we can use when we get to that stage. We're going to be drafting the block for the jacket, and it's going to be a very traditional 6-panel jacket, so 2 front panels, 2 side panels, 2 back panels. So all in all, you'll draft 3 pattern pieces. It's a pretty straightforward design, and drafting patterns, you know, every tailor has their own method. There's been numerous books written on the subject, and what I've done is sort of amalgamated a lot of stuff that I've read from various books, because I've never found one particular drafting method to work 100% for me. Hopefully this will work for you. I mean, I'm not going to guarantee that it will be perfect, but certainly by beginning to draft, you'll get a better understanding of how a 2-dimensional piece of paper can then be transferred to a 2-dimensional piece of cloth and obviously form a 3-dimensional garment. So before we begin drafting, we need some measurements. So don't go and try and take your own measurements, get somebody to help you. The measurements you're going to need are as follows. You'll need your chest measurement. That's around the fullest part of your chest at nipple level. You'll need your natural waist. Again, where is your natural waist? Well, generally it falls at the lowest point of where your elbow is. So if you bend your arm and feel where your elbow is, that's where you put the tape around. You'll need your neck measurement, so your neck circumference. You'll need the half back measurement, and that is from the centre back across to where a sleeve meets the back. You'll need your shoulder measurement, so how wide your shoulders are. You'll also need your arm side, and that is taken from the nape of your neck down to level with your underarm. And finally, you'll need the nape of neck down to your natural waistline. So, having got all your measurements, write them down and keep them safe. The other thing, I work normally in imperial measurements. Now I know lots of people work in metric, so what I'm going to attempt to do is give you both measurements as we do the drafting. I will try and get it right, but please don't shout at me if I make a little mistake. I'll round up any metric measurements to the nearest millimetre or so. That way we know it's going to be pretty close. So you'll need your paper that you're going to draft your pattern on. Like I say, I use brown packaging paper. You'll need your ruler, your square, French curves, hip curve, all the items that I discussed in the other videos, and some pens, pencils, coloured pencils, so you can actually start drafting onto the paper. I'm going to draft this in real time. I'm not going to speed anything up because I want you to be able to follow every single step at the same time as I do it. And I'll also have some words to the side of the video explaining exactly the points that I'm talking about. All the points that we draw will be labelled, and if you follow the same method that I will use, it should be pretty straightforward. Okay, so I've got my paper taped down to the table nice and flat. Just make sure it's wide enough for what you're going to be drafting. For the jacket, we're going to do a back panel, mid panel and front panel. This paper is 75 centimetres or 29 inches wide, which is enough to do that. But also top to bottom, make sure you've got enough for the length of your garment, plus a little bit at the top and bottom for hem allowances, seam allowances at the top. So I'm going to draft this pattern to my measurements. which are as follows: chest 40 inches or 102 centimetres, arm side depth 10¼ inches, 26 centimetres, nape to waist, so down the centre back, 17½ inches or 44.5 centimetres, neck circumference 16 inches or 41 centimetres, half back width of 8 inches, 20.5 centimetres, shoulder width 6 inches, 15 centimetres, and my finished garment length will be 30 inches or 76 centimetres. So we're going to begin by drawing a vertical line on the left hand side of our paper. Come in just a little bit from the edge of the paper. We're then going to take a square and come down perhaps 3 inches, 7½ centimetres. I'm going to square across using my ruler just to extend my square, so we go right across the paper. We can mark this point O. This is our origin, where we're going to take all our measurements from. First measurement is going to be from O, and we're going to come down our arm side depth plus 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So for me that's going to be 10 5/8 of an inch or 27 centimetres. So the original was 26 plus 1 centimetre. And we'll square across. Mark this point S for arm side. We're now going to split the difference between O and S, and we're going to come up exactly halfway between. So it was 27 centimetres, so we're going to come up, or we're going to go 13.5 between, so there and there is exactly the same. Again, square across. Label this point A. I'm now going to measure down from O, and it's going to be 1/4 our arm side depth. Now it's not 1/4 from O to S, it's the original because we added a centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from there. So measure down 1/4 of your arm side depth. For me that's going to be 2½ inches or 6.5 centimetres. Square across. We'll mark this B. We're now going to put in our back neck curve. So we're going to measure across from O. We're going to measure 1/4 of our neck minus ½ centimetre or minus 1/4 of an inch. So that's going to be 9.8 millimetres, 3 7/8 of an inch. square up. So this is why you left a little bit of room at the top. We can label this point O1. And from O1 measure up 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch. We'll label this point C. We'll now take a French curve and draw a line, or a curve, from O up through C. The important thing is to make sure that at O, your French curve is parallel to this top line. You can extend it just past C. So the next measurement is going to be from O. I'm going to measure down to our waist. So that's our nape of neck to our natural waistline. For me, that is a 44.5 centimeters or 17¼ inches. Square that across. You can label this W for waist. Next we're going to put in our seat line. So this is the widest part across your buttocks. You can of course measure yourself from your nape of neck down to where that lies, but for most people it's around about 8 inches, 20.5 centimeters, and we can put a mark in. Square across again. Mark this T for seat. And now we're going to measure down from O to our finished hem length. So this is where you want your jacket to finish. Of course that's totally personal, it's your preference. Measure with a tape from your shoulder down to where you feel you want your jacket to finish. For me that's going to be 76 centimeters or 30 inches. We can square across. We can mark this H for hem. So now we've got the main lines in to construct the pattern. The first one we're going to do is we're going to go from S, and we're going to measure across our half back width. So for me that's 8 inches or 20.5 centimeters, and we're going to add 2.5 centimeters or add 1 inch. So that becomes 23 centimeters. We will square up from that point. Now it's important to label all the points that you end up making, because they'll come in later for reference, certainly when you come to strike the pattern for your armhole and for your then sleeve. So let's come across from S, and we'll mark this S1, A1, B1 and O2. From B1, measure up 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch. Label this point D. I'm going to square across just a small amount. D, measure across 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch. We'll label this D1. We can draw a line, a straight line from C to D1. This is going to form our back shoulder seam. From D1, along this line from C to D1, extend it by 1/2 inch, 12 millimeters, 1.2 centimeters, and we'll label this D2. The reason we're extending this is we want to ease in our back shoulder seam. Our front shoulder seam will be the same distance from C to D1, but we'll ease this in and it will give us a better shape over the shoulder. So I'm just going to write ease, so you know that's going to be eased in. Okay, we're now going to go from S1 and we're going to measure back towards the back seam 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. We'll square down. Label the points that we just made. So S1, so this one now becomes S2, W1, T1, H1. Go back to S1, we're going to measure up, and that's going to be 1/4 our arm side depth minus 1 centimetre or minus 3/8 of an inch. So that's going to be 5.5 centimetres, 2.25 inches. And we can label this point E. We'll square across from E. Don't have to go far, just a small amount. And from E, we're going to measure across this line. I'm going to make 3 points: E1, E2, E3. E1 is 1/2 centimetre or 1/4 of an inch. E1. From E1 across 1 centimetre. E2. And again from E2 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch to E3. So now let's measure across from W1 3 centimetres, 1 1/4 inches. I'm going to join that mark up to E2. From the top we can label this S3, W2, T2 and H2. So now we've got all the pieces in place that we can complete our back. Measure across from H1 1 centimetre. Mark this H3. Coming up to C, we're going to measure from C to D1. C to D1 should be our shoulder width plus 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So for me 6 inches plus 3/8 of an inch. 6 3/8, exactly right. If you're working in metric, it's 16.2. So I'm happy with that. If your shoulder is slightly longer, then move your point on D1 across, or if it's slightly narrower, move it back towards D. We'll start with our centre back seam, and we're going to come from O. I'm going to make a mark, you don't have to label it, 2 millimetres, 3 millimetres maximum in from O, and you're going to do the same at A but coming out from A. So go in and out. I'm going to draw a curve from this point that you just marked through A and down to S. So we use a hip curve and draw it in black pen so you can see where we're going. So this is going to be the start of our centre back seam. So it comes out at the shoulders, then in at the waist and down. I'm going to measure from W across 1.5 centimetres or 5/8 of an inch, and the same at H. Join the two marks up. Label them W3, T3, H4. Now this back curve we've drawn, we're going to go from S, and we're going to curve in to W3. Try and keep everything as gentle as you can. You don't want any jagged shapes as you go down. finish off from W3 to H4. So here's our centre back seam. Comes out over the shoulders, into the waist and down. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to draw a black line from O to C and extend, but we're not going to go from exactly O, we're going to come from the mark we just drew slightly in. This is our back neck curve. I'm going to go from C down to D2, not D1, but D2. And we're going to curve it slightly down and up to D2. And it's a very, very gentle curve. You won't want to go more than a millimetre or so. Get your curve in the right place, like that. So at the centre of between C and D2, you're coming down no more than 2 millimetres, or 1/16 of an inch, let's say. So that's our back shoulder seam. We're now going to do a curve from D2 that passes at A1 and finishes at E1. So D2 through A1 to E1. We're going to join E1 to E2 with a straight line. I'm going to join a curve from E2 there that passes through S1 and finishes at W1. Again, move your French curve around until you're happy. So along there, E2, S1, W1. I'm going to finish up by taking W1, the curve slightly out to H3. And make sure your curves blend in as well as you can. To finish off, draw a line along our hem. Obviously we're going to add a hem allowance. This, so the black lines, that's our back panel. Good thing now is to measure from our original, the first line we drew, about halfway across. So I'm going to measure 4 inches or 10 centimetres. Draw a line. Arrow top and bottom. That's your grain line. So having completed our back panel, we can move on to constructing the forepart or the front, and then our middle panel will come in as we put the measurements in. My first measurement is going to be from S, and we're going to measure across half your chest measurement plus 10 centimetres or 4 inches. So for me that's going to be 61 centimetres, 24 inches. From this point we're going to square down. This line is actually our centre front, so I'm just going to put CF, so it's the front part where your jacket overlaps either way, so that's the centre front line. We can label this point S4. We're now going to measure from S1, and we're going to measure across 1/6 of your chest measurement minus 1.5 centimetres or minus 5/8 of an inch. So for me that's 15.5 centimetres or 6.25 inches. So this is from S1. We'll label this S5. We're going to square up to our top line. We'll label these points, so A1, A2, B2, O3. From S5, measure up 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to label this point F. Going to measure between S5 and S4, which is 22 centimetres, and we're going to divide it by 2, so it becomes 11 centimetres minus 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch, so it's going to become 10 centimetres. So I'll say it again, half the distance minus 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch measured from S5 across. So 10 centimetres, and we can label this S6. At this point we're going to square up and down. This line is the front, it's going to be the front edge of our shoulder seam, and also where we're going to place a dart in later on to shape the front. So if we label these points up, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, notice I didn't label these points on centre front because they're not as important. T1, T2, T3, T4, W4, A3, B3 and O4. We're now going to draw a straight line from O4 down to B1. This is where we're going to form our front shoulder seam. I'm going to measure from O4. I'm going to measure towards the back, and the distance is going to be exactly the same as from C to D1, not D2, C to D1. So if I remember, that was 16.5 centimetres thereabouts, 6 3/8 of an inch. So measure down and make a mark. We'll label this point G, and we're going to draw a line down 1 centimetre parallel to our original back line. So we're not squaring off of this line, we're coming down parallel like so. And we're going to measure 1 centimetre down, 3/8 of an inch. And we can label this I. Remembering we've already used H, so don't get caught out, G, H. So I. We're now going to draw in our front shoulder seam, which is going to go from 0.4 down to I. And this time we're going to draw a slightly upward curve as opposed to a downward curve here. And it is a very shallow upward curve. We're not going crazy. I'm now going to join F to I with a straight line. We're going to measure up from F a third of the distance between F and I. So I've got 20.5 centimetres. So divide that by 3, which is where the calculator comes in useful. 20.5 divided by 3 is 6.8 millimetres, thereabouts. So 6.8 millimetres up from F. This point we can label J, and we're going to square off of this line, so not square across or down, but actually at right angles to J. I'm going to square across like so, and we're going to measure 1.5 centimetres or 5/8 of an inch. We can label this point K. Now, although you've got quite a lot of different marked points, these are really important around your arm, as you're going to use them for when you draft your two-piece sleeve. So make sure you mark every single point for later on. From S5, we're going to measure towards the back 4 centimetres, 1.5 inches, and we can label this S7. And we're going to square down from S7. Like so. From S, let's mark out other points in before I forget. W5, T5, H6. From S5, we're going to come up towards the back at a 45-degree angle. Like so. I'm going to come up 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. You can label this point L. We're now going to draw in our front arm shape, the armhole shape, which will come from I. It will pass through point K, come around touching on L and finishing at S7. Now it's quite a tricky tight curve, so experiment with your French curve and try and get everything as neat and tidy as you can. Like I say, the very first part of this curve is really tight, but then it opens out. Like I say, I would normally do it in pencil just to make sure we're getting something accurate. So remember, I through K, L to S7. Now what's important, our point F, and it's quite good that it's called F, is our front notch. So our front sleeve notch, so we can just mark that so you know for later on. Let's look at the front of our jacket. We need to put some form of a dart in for shaping. Obviously if you're making an overcoat, it may have no darts at all, it will just be straight down the front. There's several ways you can put darts in. You may have a fisheye dart, which obviously starts at a point, opens out and finishes at a point. You may have a dart which starts just below the chest and then runs all the way down through the hem. Or you could have a displaced dart, which is the one I'm going to demonstrate, where you have a dart that comes down to the pocket line and then the dart travels out through where the pocket line is going to be, and as you close the dart it brings the side in and you place your pocket in the cut that comes across from the dart. So we'll do that one. It's the most common one, and also it's nice because you don't end up with a dart running below your pocket or your pocket flap if you're going to put pocket flaps in. So from S6 we're going to measure down 5 centimeters or 2 inches, and we'll label this point M. From M we're going to measure down to where you want your pocket to sit. Now it's sort of trial and error until you've had a go. What you can do is obviously draw them on, cut out the pattern, put it on yourself or whoever you're making it for, and check that the pocket is at the right sort of height. But I'm going to come down 8 inches or 20.5 centimeters, and we can label this N, and we're going to square backwards and a little bit forwards. Like I say, this is where the pocket is going to go when we finish. I'm not going to label this point at the moment because we're going to put our side seam in after we place the dart in, and then we'll mark some points later on. So dart is going to start at M and it's going to come down to this point N, and I'm going to measure equally either side of this line, M down, and I'm going to put about 6mm, quarter of an inch either side. I don't want too big a dart, and I'm going to join this with a very shallow curve, and likewise for the other side, so starting from the same point. So this is our dart area. So as I said, I'm going to put in a displaced dart. That is, instead of the dart running all the way to the bottom, it stops here, and as we close, we're going to cut this line, close the dart, and that will bring the side line in flush. So if we didn't have a displaced dart, we could easily draw our back seam for the front panel in. But because we're going to change the shape of this here, we're going to open this up when we cut our pattern pieces. We just need to do a couple of changes. From H6, I want you to measure back 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. We'll call that H7. Now I'm going to draw in a pink colour, so it won't be as visible, but you'll be able to see the rough shape, and then I'll go over it as we finish it properly. What we'd normally do is draw from S7 down, passing through W5, and then coming back slightly and down to H7. So it would be something like a slight curve forwards, something like that, and then we'd blend that curve down to H7. So that would normally be our front back seam shape. The good bit is we've drawn the line in for our pocket. Where this line comes from H7 and meets the pocket line, we can actually leave that. That is correct. So I'll draw that bit in, so it is just up to the pocket. The difference is going to be in this area. We need to make a cut, or a shape, a V shape that we're going to cut when we open this pocket up. And from the line where it crosses from S7 down to H6, where it crosses our pocket opening mark, all we're going to do is measure up 6mm, quarter of an inch or so, and we're going to draw a line back to the right hand edge of the dart, so not the centre but the right hand side, and we're going to extend it out. So this part will be, we actually will cut this out of the fabric and then close the dart. That will bring the two together, and then we can put our pocket in. We know the width of our dart. If we did it, so 1.5, 5/8 of an inch, 6/8 of an inch, just about. On the top line, we're going to measure from this pink line that we drew the same width. So we're going to come out to there, and what we're going to do is we're now going to draw this back line, and it's going to come from S7 to W5, but now it's going to kick out a much tighter curve. So from S7, curve forward down to W5, but as I say, at this point now, it's going to curve down to the top edge of the pocket. Now you might say it looks a bit odd, but when the dart is closed, when this dart is closed up, that will bring that back into line. And we can just mark our pocket like so. So this is the back edge cut in and down for our front panel. Okay, let's finish the front edge, and we're going to measure from our centre front point. We're going to come across 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres. I'm going to draw a line down parallel to our centre front. Now, again, this is a matter of taste. You might want to shape the front edge of your jacket. That's something you can play with. You may want your front to come out slightly to meet the waist point. I'm just going to do a quite nice straight front edge at the moment. Let's mark these up. S8, W6, T6, H8. From H8, we're going to measure down 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch. And we're going to draw a line from this point, which will label, let's label it P. From P, we're going to draw a straight line back to H3. Front edge of our jacket is going to be slightly longer than the back, but when it's obviously all put together, it will look level. Now I'm going to put a curve in at the front, so the lower quadrant of our front of our jacket. Again, this is personal taste. What sort of curve you want? It might be a small, tight curve. Do it by eye. See what you like the look of. So something like that. We've got the middle panel to finish off, and we need to sort out our lapel. So let's come back to the middle panel and we'll finish that bit off first, and then we'll finish off on the lapel. So let's go back all the way to E2 that you drew ages and ages ago, and I'm just going to come up 3 or 4 millimeters, no, 3 millimeters, no more. Then I'm going to join that to E3, so we've got just a slight step, a slight angled top. From E2, we're going to draw down to W2 with a very slight forward curve, so same sort of shape as you've got at the front of this seam, or the front of your front jacket. So this is from E2 to W2. It's not a massive curve. Then I'm going to continue this curve down and out, and it finishes at H1. Take your time to blend these curves in, because obviously you don't want a sharp joint between the two. So use your French curve, move it around to get a nice shape. Now of course you'll notice the back edge of this middle panel overlaps our back panel. That's fine. You're going to trace off each of your panels individually, so we can add material for vents, depending if you want a centre back vent or if you want a double vent. And we'll see how it goes. So you will trace off all of these panels individually. From S1, we drew that a long time ago, we're going to come up at 45 degrees forwards and draw a line. And we're going to measure from that line so from S1 up, we're going to measure 4.5 centimetres which is 1 3/4 inches. And we're going to draw our curve in, which goes from E3, or let's label this Q before we forget. Q. So we're going to draw a curve that goes from E3 through Q and then finishes at S7. Now it's quite a nice long curve, especially at the front, because obviously you've got seam allowance. Just move things around till you're comfortable. Okay, so that's our mid panel curve put in. We just need to put the front edge of this centre panel in, and that is going to be a straight line from S7 to W5. Again, this is where you're going to have to be careful when you trace things out to make sure you're tracing the right panel. What I would do, perhaps if you're the first time of doing this, do your back panel in, let's say, a blue, do it in pencil all first, then trace over in, say, a blue pen, middle section in a red pen, and a green pen, so you can see the differences. I'm only using a couple of colours because they don't show up very well on the camera. So we've drawn down from S7 to W5, and now what happens is we're going to come forwards 1 centimetre from H6. So 1 centimetre from H6, and we can label this H9. Obviously I'm writing big as well so you can see them. You'll probably write a lot smaller. And so from W5 we're now going to curve forwards and straight down to this point that we've just created. So there you have the front seam of our centre section, centre panel. Okay, let's look at lapels. Lapels are a very personal thing as well. Some people like the lapel to start at waist height. Personally, I don't. I like them to start a little bit above the waist. The good thing with this is you can draw on your lapel shape as many times as you want. Use a pencil, you can rub it out, you can change it, you can look at it again. I'm going to draw mine again in this pink colour so you can see what I'm doing, but then we can draw over the top of it. So I like to measure up from the waist. I generally like to come up about 4 or 5 centimetres, so inch and 3/4, 2 inches, something like that. I'm just going to put a mark. I'm not going to label this because this is literally for our guidance for our lapel. Now the first thing we need to do is put in our roll line. And where does our roll line go? Well, it heads up to 04, but it's not actually, it doesn't touch 04. We need to come along this shoulder seam, and I always come across from that point 1.5 centimetres or 5/8 of an inch. And the reason being we've got to add a seam allowance later on. So I'm going to draw in pink. This is my lapel roll line, so where the lapel obviously will be on the left hand side. Now this is where you can have fun and you can obviously draw in whatever shape you want for your lapel. Just practice. I would suggest, if it's your first attempt, come down from this point at the top on just past 04, come down between 10 and say 12, so 4-5 inches. So I'm going to come down, split the difference, 11 centimetres, so that's 4.25 inches, and I'm going to square off of the roll line in both directions. This is going to form what's called the gorge line, so where the top of the lapel meets the collar, which then goes around the back. How wide do you want your lapel? That's totally up to you again. For me, I generally like it around about 8 to 8.5 centimetres, so 3¼ inches, something like that. But again, it's one of those things you can play with until you're happy with the shape. Don't draw a straight line from here to there because the lapel isn't straight, it's got a curve to it. Remembering it's going over your chest. So put a curve in, and I'm quite happy with the shape of that. That will look quite nice. It's, you know, midway up your arm. So yeah, that's pretty good. If I want, I can just draw in roughly where I think the, you know, the collar might look like. So it might come up like that. So we end up with a nice notch and then disappear. Again, this is just something you can play with. So yeah, the collar will disappear up there. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. So all we need to do is transfer this over to this side. And you've drawn your square across, so that makes it easy. All you need to do is measure the distance between there, and then obviously draw your curve in. If you decided on a different, so I've squared this from the lapel. Let's say you wanted your gauze line to become a lower shape, let's say like that. Then all you do is from the lapel roll line, square across from the point where the bottom of your gauze line, so the tip of your lapel, measure across, and then just draw the lines in. So you replicate. It's just, you know, symmetry, just a mirror image over the other side. Play around with your lapel. So my one was 8.5. Just draw that curve in. Like so. Now your lapel's not going to finish there and disappear down there. We need to draw a parallel line from 04 down. So it's parallel to the roll line. Like so, and it passes through your gauge line. The final thing we're going to do is we're going to add a 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm not going to draw it all in, I'm just going to put it in a blue. We're going to add a 1 centimetre seam allowance along there, along the top of your lapel, and all the way down the front of your jacket. When it comes to this curve, your seam allowance needs to finish here, so on this line P, not below it, because this is actually where we're going to fold our hem when we add our hem allowance. You also need to add a 1 centimetre seam allowance to your back neckline, and that will then sort that measurement out. It will be accurate from there to there. And finally, pop in a nice tight curve on your seam allowance, like so. So if I just draw it, I've not measured it, just so you can see what I'm talking about. And obviously on down. Last thing, we add our hem allowance. I generally add 1.5 inches or 4 centimetres. Again, personal choice. So I'm just going to measure from the very back line to this H1 line, and then obviously remembering we came down, so it's going to be an angled line. Like so. When we get to our curve, about the H5 line that comes down, I would just draw a curve like that, because you're going to sew your seam which comes down to this point, and it will go up just past this point. You'll then turn your hem allowance up. So that should be pretty good. So there we go. There's all your panels drawn for your jacket. Back panel, mid panel, front panel. Play with your lapel. Look at what you like the shape of. Obviously look in magazines. Or if you've got a jacket, you can copy the same style. Just measure where it fits and where it sits. Don't forget to add your 1 cm seam allowance around the lapel and all the way down the front, which finishes on this line P. You also need to add a 1 cm seam allowance on your back neck curve. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in a few balance marks, so notches as you want to call them, just so we know when we're putting things together they're right. So I'm just going to come horizontal, and I'm just going to put a mark for a notch on the seam lines here, so we know where we're going. We also need to put in 2 more marks on the arm. We're going to put our back notch for our arm, which is normally a double notch, and all we're going to do is measure down 1 cm from A1. I'm going to put a mark in. Now I'm going to put a double mark just so I know that that's the back. And finally we're going to measure back from S5, half the distance to S1 minus 1 cm, or 3/8 of an inch. So we've got from S1 to S5 is 15.5 centimetres, so 15.5 divided by 2 equals 7.75 minus 1, 6.75, so let's call it 6.7. So measuring back from S5, 6.7, and this is going to be our underarm notch. So there we have it, the 3 panels of the jacket block all done. The only difference that you'll have is probably the shape of your lapel. Obviously do that as you want. Don't forget to add your 1 cm seam allowance around the front edge and around your neck at the back. I haven't drawn a pocket in for the chest pocket because we can actually draw that in on the cloth later on. That's not a problem. Everything else is as you see it here. So go away, have a go. If it's your first time of trying, persevere. It does look hard to start with, but with practice you'll get better at it. And I'll be honest, I've had to do this about 4 times while I've been filming it, because even I make mistakes, everybody does. So just take your time and follow the video. You should end up with something that looks like this. Trace off your 3 panel pieces, like I say, onto a clean piece of paper. Make sure you transfer any markings, darts, notches, etc, etc. Really quick and easy way of doing it is by using a spiked tracing wheel. Put paper underneath and then just go over your lines. It will make little dents which will go through to the paper underneath, and then you can just redraw over the top. Like I say, just make sure you put all the markings in and all notches, etc. Okay, so the next video I will show you how to construct a 2-piece sleeve. So we'll be needing to know quite a few of these points. I'll also then show you how to construct your vent fabric, depending on what type of vent you want, either a centre vent or a side vents. So until next time, happy sewing. Go away, have a go. And I'll speak to you soon.